This multi-billionaire CEO is telling the world that the United States is already in a recession, but there's something very unique about this company that everybody should be paying attention to. Of course, we're talking about the airline CEO of Southwest Airlines, who came out and said the recession has already come for airlines because they're seeing a big drop off here pretty soon. So, CEO Bob Jordan told Bloomberg that the demand has cratered in recent months, with domestic leisure travel dropping more than he's ever seen besides the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, with that, there's something very, very interesting about the Southwest CEO. Well, Southwest Airlines isn't exactly the giant that is of the airlines, but it is the seventh largest in the world. And something that is also very unique is that Southwest Airlines strictly does domestic travel. So it's just in the United States. Maybe it goes to a few different countries outside of the United States, but majority of their flights are strictly in the United States. So they have a big and wide range of business travel and other travels like that, as well as consumer travel for various vacations. Maybe you want to go to Disney, take the family out there. But all of this is to say that they are feeling like the consumer is having a huge negative effect or negative feeling when it comes to the overall macro economy, and it's dealing with macroeconomic uncertainty. So even though some are riding economic ebbs, the policy shifts and others, almost all airlines are struggling with the impacts of tariffs and lower consumer confidence. Look, I'm not sure that the consumer not flying domestically is all because of tariffs. It always seems like they want to point to that. But it's interesting that we didn't have any other CEOs, and especially the airline CEOs, coming out and saying a lot of negatives and just blatantly saying, hey, I think we're in a recession. The Southwest Airlines was the first CEO to come out and say that. Now, with that, the Delta Airlines CEO said that there is broad economic uncertainty. They've cut growth forecasts. The United Airlines said that they're marching towards a recession scenario. Alaskan Airlines said that the revenue is down 6%. It's difficult to forecast CEOs, although the Southwest Airlines just simply said, I don't care if you call it, I don't care if you call it a recession or not. This industry is that of a recession. It's reliant, like I said, on domestic leisure travels more than other airlines, and it gets a significant portion of its revenue from business travel. Because of this, Southwest is more vulnerable to changes in consumers willing to shell out money for travel. So this, as I've been covering for a few different videos, and this is all a sign of the consumer confidence. Now, whether or not you describe it like we're in a recession or we're not, a big driver of a recession is whether or not the consumer believes we're in a recession or not, right? Because it all kind of points down to how the overall consumer is feeling. Do we really think that we are in a recession? If I were to lose my job today, would I be able to get one very quickly? And I'm going to go into more data as to why the consumer is feeling like they wouldn't be able to get back here in a second. But first, let's revisit the consumer confidence, because that has plummeted. Consumer expectations for a future at a 12-year low. That means the confidence was even lower than we saw during COVID and the cerveza sickness, as a friend of the program, George Gammon, always says. But the Consumer Confidence Board fell by 7.2% in March to 92.9. So what is the consumer confidence? As I kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, it's all based around the fact that, does the consumer think we're in a recession? Does the consumer legitimately believe that we are going to get out of this and get out of it very quickly, right? I think that this overall is just showing that the consumer is very worried. They are not as chipper and jolly as we've seen maybe before, right? And that's to point to the potentials of this weakening job market, right? We have had the job market undergoing a remarkable transformation shaped by technology, advancements, everything looking great. But the tariffs have people really worried about what would happen, right? Look at the article title here. The job market is frozen. So what does that mean when the job market is frozen? It means that unemployment is low, but workers aren't quitting and businesses aren't hiring. So everybody is in somewhat of a stagnation type of area. And in 6 months, 576 applications, 29 responses for interview, still no job. Look at that story. When my younger brother rattled off these numbers to me in fall of 2023, I was dismissive. He had recently graduated with honors from a top private university into a historically strong labor market. I assured him with the struggles, it was a fluke. But like I said, it seems like the job market is very frozen because everybody's looking at this. There's a risk of a global economic recession. US tariffs are in shockwaves, right? We've got the seventh largest airline CEO in the world coming out and saying we are openly in a recession. And we've got others who are openly saying that it's difficult to look at the economic data and really forecast anything outside of a recession. We've even had Ray Dalio come out and say that this recession is going to be bigger and worse than anything we have seen before. So that is something that, they're raising all of these alarm bells all over the world. And these CEOs, they have a list of people. They say, hey, if shit hits the fan, we are going to cut this amount of people. We've actually even had the Intel CEO, I believe, come and cut about 20%, or another tech CEO. I'll have to look that up. I'm just thinking of this on the fly for you guys. But all of this is to say that a lot of these tariffs are, quote, fueling the fears of a recession. And there's a lot of uncertainty with that, right? Because we've been worried about a recession for so long, there's been a lot of people who are fearful that this might come about here pretty quickly. And we've seen big swings in the dollar like we've never seen before, right? I mean, we've got a small percentage right now, movement of 0.07, but look at this past month. We've seen 4% swing downward. And year to date, the dollar having the worst start we've ever seen before since they started tracking it, down over 8%. So the confidence of the dollar has been falling. And because the confidence of the dollar, the DXY, is falling, it's showing not only the consumer, but everybody else is worried about the dollar. Everybody else is worried about that, right? When consumers are uncertain, they pull back. Consumers can immediately stop spending. So Southwest has reported a 10.9% year-over-year increase in revenue as part of its first quarter earnings on Wednesday, but rising labor and maintenance costs plus booking softness weighed on results. The Dallas-based company pulled both its 2025 and 26 guidance. And a lot of people are looking at highly impacted on the demand side by tariffs. That's what they're saying. But it's really the consumer confidence, right? Because when the consumer is fearful, they start to pull back. Consumer confidence declined for a fourth consecutive month in March, falling relatively low comparatively to the overall narrative. So it's a range they haven't seen since 2022. That's where they even fell below that. Of the index's 5 components, only consumers' assessment of present labor market conditions improved, albeit slightly. Views of current conditions and weekends come to close to neutral. Now, consumers' expectations were especially gloomy, with pessimisms about future business conditions deepening and confidence about future employment prospects falling to a 12-year low. So we're seeing these signs, right? And I think the biggest and most telling sign is we always see like the airlines start to lead recessions, right? And the Fed has come out and said, hey, if we get a recession, we start to see the labor market start to drastically fall down, we're going to cut interest rates, right? But the thing is that when the Fed makes these moves, when the Fed cuts interest rates, the Fed is very reactionary. They're reacting to things that happened, and the things that happen are for policies that were implemented months ago. You don't necessarily see the effect of a lot of these cuts or anything else really until months down the line, right? If the Fed were to cut interest rates today, we maybe would see a bump in the market and some initial rises up, but we're not going to see everything be peaches and daisies right away. It takes time for these policies to really go into effect. And that's why I think it's interesting that we're seeing a 6.9% nice um, of probability that the Fed is going to cut interest rates at this next meeting. The Fed realizes that the strength of the dollar, what we're seeing is really falling down, right? But because we have so many inflationary concerns, we haven't necessarily seen anything crack just yet. Because we haven't seen anything crack, we could keep these rates a little bit higher. McLovin in the chat saying the Fed has been trying to crush the economy for a while. JP should be happy. Haven't we already seen a recession? According to the technical definition, sure seems like it anyways. Yeah, so it is interesting. I don't know if you guys remembered here in the chat, but not too long ago, we actually changed the definition of a recession because of seeing negative growth in GDP for 4 months in a row, and then they changed it. And the interesting aspect of all of this is that we're seeing things like the S&P 500 continue to rise up. We're seeing like positive returns. Granted, it's negative year to date, but in the past year, it's up almost 9%, even with down 6% in the past, in the first quarter of this year about. And so we're seeing the S&P 500 go on seemingly a generational run here that we've never really seen before. And that leads me to believe that we're either going to be or we are in an asset bubble, right? I mean, because when we have a big, giant inflationary battle, the job market is, quote, frozen. When we see things like this, the rich put a bunch of their money into hard assets, right? So when they put money into hard assets, that's when we see, obviously, the hard assets start to rise up. When we see these hard assets begin to rise up, that is when we, kind of seemingly see an asset bubble. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. That gap continues to increase. So Southwest Airlines is saying, hey, business travel, we're, suspending it for a little bit. We're not going to send our guys going all over the place just for funsies anymore. We're going to be a little bit more conservative because of some of the issues that we are potentially seeing here. So if you guys like this content, please smash that like button like Cheech and Chong. Hit the subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers as quickly as possible. And I'm going to do that just to keep bringing you guys some great content. So if you guys really did enjoy it, please hit that subscribe button for me, because Southwest shares are down just slightly, right? 0.6% after adding 3.6%, because all these other airlines saying there's no way to predict exactly where demand is going, but we're seeing it go down, right? They're all changing their expectations as well at the airlines. They're all saying that, hey, we should be less, I guess, ambitious for the growth of these airlines. And we're anticipating to see a big slowdown. So as I said before, smoke the like Cheech and Chong, smash the subscribe button, tell a friend to tell a friend. McLovin is saying, I feel like that we've been in a recession for a while and we're nearing the bottom, which means a turnaround is coming soon. At least I hope so. With that, I think it's interesting. The way I look at it is I look at the Dixie narrative. That this is kind of one of the big telltale signs for me. How is the strength of the dollar looking at it, right? So what we've seen basically a consensus around showing that, hey, we're in a recession. The consensus is the dollar is going to start to tumble. The dollar's losing a lot of hope. That's the narrative going on right now. And when you see these type of narratives, you usually have to go to the opposite trade, right? Look, obviously it's not financial advice or anything, but I agree with you, McLovin. When we're having these overall, the bears are screaming up and down, hey, we've lost it. We've absolutely thought that, these things are terrible. It's not going to work out. Because of this is when you do the opposite, right? This is when you do the exact opposite of what you think or of what everybody else is saying. So that's where I agree with you, McLovin. TF is saying flip a coin, attack the US dollar. Seems like everybody's trying to say that there are. But at the end of the day, right, when it comes to things like these airlines, for example, right? Maybe we're transacting on Delta Airlines. They're pricing these things in euros, but Delta is not holding euros, right? Delta is going to continue to hold US dollars. They're going to go towards that. So although these major international corporations might deal with different currencies here or there, the dollar is still reigning king, at least for now. So smoke the like, hit the subscribe button, tell a friend to tell a friend, and hit the bell notification so you guys know when I'm going live next. Thank you guys for joining me on this early morning rip.